and repeat the Nembutsu with me. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandats, 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 namandats. Good morning, everyone. Wow. Happy March. I can't believe it. It's already March, the third month of the year, 2023. And it seems like only yesterday we started back in January. And just a quick question to the Dharma School students, now that you're back in school, are you starting to feel the fatigue of school or getting tired of school a little bit? Yes, no, yeah. Like, oh, that's good. Teachers assign me so much homework, so much reading, so much, class time, like probably a lot of those things. That's okay, because that means spring break is just around the corner. Today, we're going to have a continuation of talking about the three treasures. So, the first 2 months of the year, I talked about the first treasure, and that was the Buddha. Very good. Which means that the next treasure is going to be the Dharma. Very good. And that means the last treasure is going to be the very good. I love this. I love this call and response. Maybe it keeps you all engaged and hopefully you don't fall asleep during the Dharma talk. So we are on the second treasure, the Dharma. What does the Dharma mean? Dharma can mean law, truth, or teaching. For Buddhism, it encompasses all three, and it has much deeper meaning to that too. But when we say law, right, we're not talking about the law that's made by the government, but the very law of nature. We are born and that we eventually pass away. The other part of natural law is that we all have desires. We all are human beings, yes? All of us sitting in here are human beings, which means that we have desires. How many of us here have desires? Raise your hand. Everybody in the congregation should be raising their hand, even the adults. We all have desires. We all have wants. Being born as a human being means that we have wants and desires. These desires range from everything of material possessions, things that we want, or like maybe the next place. I think they're actually talking about the PlayStation 6 now, yes? And the next level of computer, the next gaming system. For adults, maybe you want a new car. Maybe for adults, you want, maybe you want to win that lottery ticket, right? Or whatever the next lottery is. But then we also have other desires too. Desire for recognition, right? When we do something good or when we have, when we accomplish something great, we want people to, recognize that. We want people to say, good job. We want to hear that validation, right? And the Buddha taught about these truths of who we are. Yet, I also have to emphasize this as well. The Buddha might have emphasized these truths about us, right? The Dharma, that we as born as humans, right, have all desires. But the Buddha also said, or the Buddha also did not mean that we are bad people for having these desires. So I want to make this very clear. People often think that because the ultimate goal of Buddhism is enlightenment, yes? The cessation of those desires, the cessation of those cravings that we all have. And, even though Buddhism, the ultimate goal or the ultimate end goal is to free ourselves from those desires, that does not mean that because we have those desires makes us bad people. This is incorrect. The Buddha taught the Dharma to us not to basically point the finger and say in a judgmental way, oh, you are all horrible people for having such desires. The Buddha taught the Dharma so we become aware of the desires that we have. We become aware that we all have wants and desires. And when these wants and desires are not satisfied, sometimes we get mad and upset. It's very common, and it happens to everybody. When we have many of our Dharma school students take part in sports, correct? And when you don't win the competition like the way we want, we all want to win, yes? But when we don't win, we get upset, we get sad, we might get angry, we might start saying the other team cheated or saying things like that. But this is part of our natural cravings of wanting to win or wanting to be the best. However, Buddhism teaches us that these things are natural, they come up, and to not judge ourselves too harshly for these desires, but to also not get trapped by them, okay? So this is what the Buddha taught us. This is the first part of the Buddha's teaching of the Four Noble Truths, right? Life is a bumpy road. Life is a little bit hard. And the reason for this is because of the wants and desires that we all have. Everybody in this room, Dharma school students, myself, adults, Dharma school teachers, we all have wants and desires. We all have different wants and desires. Sometimes our wants and desires are the same, but other times they actually might conflict. Naturally, there can only be one winner to a game sometimes, or whoever wins, and I hate bringing it up, right? But the lottery, there can only be one winner for some of these things. But when we're not the person who wins, we get upset and we get angry. But then Buddhism comes in and teaches us that, yes, that happened. You had this desire, you had this want, it didn't come to fruition, right? And it's okay to feel upset about it. However, feel upset about it, take in what you have, take in the feeling, and then let it go. And sometimes we can't do this, right? Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we have hard times of letting it go. Sometimes this feeling may stay with us for days, right? But then you might notice something. For the Dharma school students especially, you might notice that you don't finish all of your homework on time. You don't finish the tasks at hand in front of you. You might be a little bit slower in moving. You might be a little bit behind. And the reason is because we allow sometimes these desires and disappointment to stay with us for a long, long time. So Buddhism doesn't teach us that having these desires or having these wants is a bad thing. Buddhism teaches us that having these wants and having these desires is a natural thing, right? It's natural, they come up. But the other thing that Buddhism teaches us and that the Buddha taught us is that when it doesn't go our way, we have to let it go too. It's okay to get upset. It's okay to feel disappointment. It's okay to get angry sometimes. But then if you hold on to that constantly, there will be a lot of suffering just on our own part. We are, in the end, the cause of our own suffering. I'm going to end this Dharma talk with that story, that famous story of the two monks walking and needing to cross the river. This is actually not a Jodo Shinshu story. This is more of a story of Buddhist monks who follow the Vinaya, or the really strict rules of conduct of monks, right? But this is a good example of this. So maybe some of you have heard this story before, but I'm wondering if the Dharma school students have heard it before. So there are the story of these two monks who were walking along the road, and they come to a river that they need to cross, and they're going to have to cross and wade through. I mean, the river is, maybe it's not a river, it's more of a creek, right? But it's wet, and they're going to have to get their legs wet in the water. And there is a woman who is also needing to cross, and she doesn't have any means of crossing. The older monk goes to the woman and stoops down and offers to carry her, right? And so he carries her and takes her across the river. Now, the younger monk is stunned by this. He is absolutely just, this is his senior teacher, right? And he was told that, as a young monk, he's not allowed to touch women. He's not allowed to, physically touch women, right? That's actually against one of the code of conducts of the old Vinaya Buddhist, Buddhist kind of like rules that monks have to follow, right? So anyways, they get to the other side, they cross. And then the senior monk lets the woman down. They bow to each other and part ways, and then they continue walking. So naturally, as they're walking back to the monastery, and they're way beyond the river now, the younger monk is starting to get mad. He's starting to let things fester inside of him. He's starting to get really upset. So finally, he turns to the older monk and he starts yelling at him. And he starts going, how could you do such a horrible thing? You know what our rules are. We are not allowed to touch women. We are not supposed to do that, right? You've broken the vows and da-da-da. And he started yelling at the older monk, giving him this huge lecture. The older monk, being the more seasoned and more understanding and more patient of the two, calmly looks back at his disciple and he says, I put that woman down many miles back at the river. It seems that you are the one who's been carrying her this whole time. So again, right, yes, did the monk do something bad, right? But maybe the monk did have to break a rule or something, right? And I'm not encouraging the Dharma school students or encouraging you all, go and break rules, right? I'm not saying that. The point of the story, right, is that sometimes we see things that we don't agree with or that, can make us angry, or we have wants and desires, and those things are sometimes not satisfied. And then what ends up happening, right, is we carry that with us again and again and again. And especially for the Dharma school students, as you go throughout your day of school, sports competitions, in the future, right? Try not to allow the disappointments to be carried with you day after day after day. Yes, it's okay to feel disappointment. It's okay to feel upset, but don't allow yourself to be weighed down by those things. And so that is the story of the two monks who crossed the river. So I hope you enjoyed that story and that part of the Dharma talk. In closing, will you all please join me in Gassho? Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandavs, namandavs, namandavs. Will you all please join me in Gassho? Naman. The Buddha said, now I have expounded this sutra for all sentient beings and have enabled you to see the Buddha of immeasurable life and everything in his land. If you have questions about what to do, you should ask me now, so that you may not give rise to further doubt after I have entered nirvana. In the future, all the sutras will become extinct. However, out of compassion and pity, I will ensure that this sutra alone remains for a further 100 years. Those sentient beings who encounter this sutra will attain emancipation in accordance with their aspiration. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Good morning again, everyone. Wow, I still can't believe that it is March. We still might have to put up with some cold though, but it seems that the cycle of the season still continues, whether we like it or not. So continuing off of the Dharma talk that I gave this morning about Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, what is important about it? Well, in this adult Dharma talk, I'd like to briefly discuss about the 3 Pure Land Sutras. What's really neat is that what we just chanted today, right? The first part of Amida Kyo is one of the 3 Pure Land Sutras. The other one that I just read from is from the larger Pure Land Sutra. So we did a portion of the smaller sutra. For the Dharma talk, I read part of the larger sutra. And then lastly, there is the Contemplation Sutra. And I will talk about all of these sutras during the Dharma talks in the months to come. But for the larger sutra, right, these are the words that are spoken by the Buddha. And that's what makes a sutra, okay? So when we talk about Dharma, when we talk about sutras, right, some people may say, well, what makes a sutra a sutra? Why is it called a sutra? because they are words spoken by the Buddha. So the Buddha actually spoke about Amida Buddha's Pure Land in the larger sutra. And for us as Jodo Shinchu Buddhists, this is, the most important aspect of the Buddhist teaching. And why is this? Because this is the story of Bodhisattva Dharmakara, who eventually would become Amida Buddha, and regarded as the central teaching of our school of Jodo Shinchu, according to Master Shinran. And when I would think about this sutra, I would say it is so impressive that this sutra has lasted beyond the ages, right? This sutra wasn't written, yesterday or written 2 weeks ago. And when you think about it, it wasn't written or recorded down even when our great country of the United States of America was founded. It was thousands of years before that. And yet it is still transmigrated through time to us today. We can read it here at the Tacoma Buddhist Temple. But of course, not just what's important is that the Buddha spoke it, but what the Buddha spoke on in terms of the teaching. And this was, this was the thing that I think, this was the aspect of our teaching that helped solidify it throughout the ages. This is one of the most popular teachings of Buddhism, I think, that has ever existed. It once again provides a gateway and a teaching that gives us comfort. All of us sentient beings who encounter this teaching are provided with a sense of comfort and a sense of belonging. We all feel the need of a sense of belonging and acceptance. And this is what the larger sutra provides us with. All sentient beings are welcomed to Amida Buddha's Pure Land. All sentient beings are looked upon equally in the Dharma's eyes. We all have physical differences about us. We all have mental differences. We all think differently. We all have many differences that surround us, and the causes and conditions that have brought about our birth are varied and wide. And these differences aren't something that should be shunned or should be, excluded. They actually should be celebrated. But ultimately, Amida Buddha looks at all sentient beings with a great sense of equanimity, with a great sense of equality. All of the beings in the 10 directions are welcomed into Amida Buddha's Pure Land. So this speaks to the heavy vastness of Shakyamuni Buddha's knowledge of what people are like. We, as people, like to distinguish ourselves from others. We like to prop ourselves up. We like to feel different. Sometimes we also like to distinguish ourselves from other people. And, a lot of this is done out of ego, of course. And, again, right, and as I said in the previous Dharma talk, important recognitions and, recognizing people for their service should be done. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be done. Yet, Amida Buddha and the Dharma sees us for who we really are, and that is a sentient being who is not yet enlightened. We are all beings who are not yet enlightened. And because of this, we are all accepted by Amida Buddha to the Pure Land. And I think this is, it speaks to this alone in the teaching of the 3 Pure Land Sutras. And the last part of the quote, Shakyamuni Buddha states that in the future, all the sutras will become extinct. However, out of compassion and pity, I will ensure that this sutra alone remains for a further 100 years. Those sentient beings who encounter the sutra will attain emancipation in accordance with their aspiration. So again, Shakyamuni Buddha realized how deep and how vast this teaching of pure acceptance, no matter who you are, to the Pure Land is. And because of this, it was assured that this sutra would last throughout the ages. Now, there are other sutras that exist too, some that are really, really knowledgeable and filled with wonderful teachings. But again, the reason why this sutra is so important is because it tells of the story of Bodhisattva Dharmakara saving all sentient beings. And as I said before, we all want to feel a sense of belonging and acceptance. Sometimes we are afraid to go to new places because we feel that we're different, or we don't look like the people who are in a group that we want to join. Sometimes we feel different because because of other factors as well. There are plenty of things that would stop us from either trying to join a group or join a community, because we feel that we might be judged by those differences. However, one of the things that Amida Buddha states is that all beings are welcomed to my Pure Land. All one needs to do is say Namo Amida Butsu. How wonderful of a teaching that is. We don't have to prove our loyalty by donating a certain amount, right? Of course, I'm not saying, of course, we always welcome donations to the temple, but no matter how much you donate, right, that doesn't get you closer to Amida Buddha. You might try doing meditation. That's a wonderful practice. That's a practice that, if it helps you get through the day, if it helps calm you down, wonderful. But you don't have to meditate for a certain amount of hours in order to prove your worth to Amida Buddha. And in fact, actually in saying Namo Amida Butsu, when we place our hands together and say Namo Amida Butsu, we don't have to say it 10,000 times in order to show that we are putting our trust in Amida Buddha. The important thing is that we feel Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion in the here and now. And because we know that we are fully accepted and embraced by the Amida Buddha, that is what causes us to put our hands together and say Namo Amida Butsu. How wonderful of a teaching this is. Shakyamuni Buddha realized that, and what's also really amazing about this particular teaching is that Shakyamuni Buddha realized that, physically speaking, he wasn't going to be around forever. He too, as awakened and as enlightened as he was, realized that he would not last in this world forever. His body would also become old, and he would also pass away into parinirvana. But because of that, he made teachings accessible to people. He told us that there is still a way to follow the Dharma and to be embraced by the great Dharma in order for all sentient beings to be saved, even after he was gone. And this is what that sutra provides us. When we think about it, this year at Nishihonganji, they are celebrating Shinran Shonin's 850th year of birth, right? 850 years ago, and 800 years since the establishment of our head organization of Jodo Shinshu Honganji Ha, right? Or of Jodo Shinshu itself, of the teaching of Jodo Shinshu. 800 years. No one in this congregation, no one in the world is 800 years old, as far as I know. So it says something to me that this teaching, that this Dharma that was shared by Shakyamuni Buddha and that was taught by Master Honen and Master Shinran has survived all throughout these decades, or all throughout these centuries, I should say, and from the time of Shakyamuni Buddha. And it is because of the accessibility that this teaching provides us on a daily basis. It's the accessibility that this teaching gives us, where we don't have to do strenuous practices or donate huge amounts of money in order to prove ourselves. However, it is also something that has lasted for so long. So what is that speaks to us? It is the everlasting acceptance of who we are to the Amida Buddha's Pure Land. And when we feel that acceptance, and when we feel that love, we place our hands together and say, Namo Amida Butsu. So these are wonderful stories of Shakyamuni Buddha telling us of Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion. And I will continue to talk about these stories in future Dharma talks this month, since we're on the topic of the Dharma. But until that time, please try your best to stay warm, because we are still not done with the cold weather yet. And spring is just around the corner, and I hope to see beautiful blossoms bloom. In closing, will you all please join me in Gassho? The Buddha said, now I have expounded this sutra for all sentient beings and have enabled you to see the Buddha of immeasurable life and everything in his land. If you have questions about what to do, you should ask me now, so that you may not give rise to further doubt after I have entered nirvana. In the future, all sutras will become extinct. However, out of compassion and pity, I will ensure that this sutra alone remains for a further 100 years. Those sentient beings who encounter this sutra will attain emancipation in accordance with their aspiration. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.